Hi everyone, it's Kevin Murray here from Garland magazine, and I'm currently in Wurundjeri land, and it's a great pleasure to be here with some of the contributors and others connected to the issues related to our 10th issue, Kaya. And let's see who we've got here. So beginning with Glenn.
Hi there.
Hello.
How you going?
And where are you at the moment?
I'm sat in my home office in Palmyra, which is about 5 minutes drive from Fremantle in Western Australia, so the port city of Perth. And yeah, so I've just been spending the day catching up on a whole lot of various mundane admin tasks. But yeah, so did you want a little history about ourselves, a little bit about ourselves? Or?
Yeah, just a little, that would be good.
Yeah, so formerly I was a curator working in major museums and galleries, and more recently I'm a creative arts consultant working predominantly with art centres across Australia, so Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists. So I'm a Yamaji and Noongar man on my father's side, and yeah, member of a migrant family on my mother's side.
Great. Thanks. And Bernard?
Hi, I'm Bernard Kerr, a ceramic artist and an educator. So it's a beautiful day here in Perth. I'm living and speaking to you from Glen Forest in the Darling Scarp. So it's the hills behind Perth. I've spent the day at TAFE, Central TAFE, teaching ceramics, and just been working in my studio on my return. And my background is really a combination of both those roles, of both working in education and ceramics, always the duality. Sometimes one takes precedence over the other. And I also work for the International Baccalaureate. So of late, I've been doing a lot of work throughout Asia and just recently visited India. I find it fascinating that we have 4 people in these diverse geographic locations and that we can all communicate. It's a wonder of technology, and it's I think it's an incredible thing that we can be sitting here and actually doing this in such a way, and I can see people on thousands of kilometres away.
Yeah, well, something we should take advantage of.
Yes, absolutely.
And Varuni, Sundaram.
Hi, hello everyone. So I live about 35 kilometers north of the city of Melbourne, and in a bush environment. And today, so I sort of go back and forth from the city to the bush. And today, this morning, I was working. I'm doing a sort of a short project, which utilizes my research background. And the ARC, which is the Australian Research Council, is doing some impact studies in order to assess. So they wanted people with research background to interview researchers and compile case studies to look at impact of their research. So this is across the whole university. So I'm doing it at Aramati University, where I'm doing my postgraduate studies in art as well. So that is why I'm involved in this. But they're doing it across all fields and to assess impact with respect to outcome. So the outcome being more than academia.
Okay, Varun, thank you. That's interesting. And you're originally from Sri Lanka? And
I'm originally from Sri Lanka, yeah.
New Zealand? Terrific. Yeah. Well, we'll get back to you.
All right.
And now across the Indian Ocean to Mauritius. Welcome, Vimanda.
Thank you. So I'm Vimanda Köppen from Mauritius, the melting pot with different cultures. And I am an artist, Mauritian artist, working basically in printmaking. And I teach printmaking at the School of Fine Arts. And well, I'm also very happy, a bit intimidated also to be among you guys. And I do hope we'll have a very, very fruitful chat today.
yes, I hope to be the beginning of many more. So let's go back to Glenn. Can you tell us a little about the article that you wrote for this issue of Garland? What was the story that you wanted to tell?
So the article I wrote, which was about an exhibition that I curated for the South Australian Museum, which is called Nora, Home in the Nyanadara Lands, was really an article that perhaps I wasn't able to write whilst I was, producing material for the exhibition and catalogue and what have you. So it was a real personal account of what home means for Nyanadara people in the Western Desert. So, these are spaces that are often quite romanticised, or, they're looked at through the lens of anthropology or ethnology. And nobody has really done an exhibition which kind of looks at the way people live in those spaces and how they connect to them in a human way. And so, the article was kind of a real personal reflection on my experience of making that exhibition and working in such a remote location. So to get to Warrakurna, the main route that I would take would either be through Alice Springs to Uluru and then drive back into Western Australia. So I'd have to leave the state to get back to my own state. And sometimes it would be through Sydney, so it would be across the country to go back to Western Australia. So it's a very remote place, but equally there's a kind of a life and a way of living in those spaces which connects more broadly to the human experience. And we really wanted to share that through the exhibition. And I guess the article was very much a byproduct of the experience of making the exhibition, what the exhibition shared with people, but also kind of my own understanding of home and my understanding as a kind of a metaphor for so many kind of mixed-race Aboriginal people in Australia who, have never lived on their country, have never spoken, their traditional language, who don't have their custom and their tradition. But, it's a way of kind of making meaning of those things as a curator when you're working with communities who still have access to their own traditions and language. So, the article was very much a kind of a personal reflection on the experience, and it was a really challenging one to write because it sort of asked me to kind of look quite deeply into my own personal and lived experience and the experience of my parents and grandparents, and look for those moments of fracturing, which have led to me being me, and I'm perfectly happy being me, but I'm also mindful of the kind of immense amount of culture that my family on my Aboriginal side have lost in the last couple of 100 years. So it was a challenging and epic journey to write that essay, but it was something that I hadn't been offered the opportunity to do through the formal channels in terms of making an exhibition. So it was a really kind of interesting process to go through, particularly given that I'd left the museum in December. So it was almost like diving back into the recent past and a much deeper sense of my own past as well.
Yes, and it's interesting how you reflect on the sense of home, Ngura, Nyananjara, which seems so different to particularly an urban kind of existence, yet you're able to take away something from that, it seemed in the article.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've spoken about this before, Kevin, but I mean, I don't particularly call myself an urban Aboriginal person. I grew up in the far northwest, and I choose to live here now, but it's and that impacts my life experience from day to day kind of point of view, but my kind of sensibilities of the world are very much informed through kind of being in faraway places. And so that was quite lovely as well. I think in writing the text, it had me revisiting some of those locations kind of in my mind's eye, and also I was lucky enough, towards the end of writing the essay, to go back to Kununurra, which was one of those really formative towns for me. And so in writing the text and thinking about what home means, both from a Nyanadara point of view, my personal point of view, trying home means more broadly to Australians, and why we have such incredibly horrific turf wars over a continent that essentially for many thousands of years was the home of people. And recently and politically through the colonial adventure, we see people, taking claims to territory on this continent, which perhaps are so young and fresh that need to be rethought a little. So, and in starting the essay, it was around Australia Day. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of way to unpack some of those political narratives that were happening around the time, particularly with the Change the Date movement and what have you. So yeah, it's a big essay with a lot of topics in it, and from that, I think there'll be a fair bit more writing that comes because there's only so much room to unpack.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. And it certainly set the tone for other articles. And if we go to Bernard, your article, Thinking About Home, was working with people who have migrated to Australia, the Tamil community. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. I think that's a really interesting idea about what home is and what it means. And I think how that is a constantly evolving concept in one's lived experience, is that home is constantly being redefined somehow, I think. And certainly through that experience of having a visiting Tamil artist and working with him, but also being involved with the Tamil community. And also travelling, having travelled to India. I've travelled to India 3 times in the last 2 years. And having that depth of connection and increasing understanding of things, I think it changes the way that I perceive my place and actually living here in Perth, Western Australia. I'm from English-Scottish background, and yet there's still this sense of strangeness and a desire, I think, to be more connected to the Australian environment. But that's brought into some type of contrast with looking at another rich culture that's very close to us that I've visited. And so writing the article was an experience in trying to relive something that had a whole range of intellectual and physical experiences for me. So not only watching someone work in very ancient ways, but also building a massive kiln, which was it was almost soul destroying. It was a really exhausting experience that really became a form of ritual. And I think I mentioned that in the article, how the ritual really affected me on quite an emotional plane, and deepened my understanding, I think, for different cultural ways of thinking about the world, and maybe in some ways made me think more about how universal some of the ideas are, both cultural ideas and religious ideas and ideas of recreation and all of those things. Where I live is in the Perth Hills, and so that there's a real connection with the landscape. And we have it's a biodiversity hotspot with incredible flora. And so that's part of my everyday experience, is to look at the wonder of the evolution of the space. And somehow that connection with the Tamil association and the Tamil potter and Indian ritual has kind of highlighted that for me and made me think more about my own sense of self and sense of identity.
Can you explain just specifically what kind of ritual you're referring to that affected you?
The rituals that every day the Kasarajam, the Tamil potter, would perform a puja before he commenced work every day. He constructed some sculptures of Ganesha, because Ganesha is the god that paves the way and makes things easy and prevents obstacles from coming in the way, so it kind of attains success. But after it was almost 2 months we spent building this really very large kiln to fire these giant horses. There was a ritual when we actually lit the kiln, and it was a very emotional time for everyone, I think, because we had worked so hard and we developed a sense of community and a sense of connectedness. And that culmination in terms of lighting the kiln, I certainly became teary. I think many people did. And it was the form of because it was the form of a blessing and that for me was a very life-altering experience.
And he may return, is that right?
Yes, he's coming in at the end of September. So that's under the auspices of the Ceramic Arts Association of Western Australia. And I think there'll be great rejoicing. The fact that he made so many connections here, and he'll be working with people that he knows, and it also will link the Tamil community to the ceramic community of Western Australia. And there is talk of one of the fellows who worked very closely with him actually staying with him in India. So there's a nice cross-cultural connection.
And you describe, a little sadly, a failure of at least one of the horses in terms of the kind of mixture that was being used in the clay. Will you try something different next time?
Oh, absolutely. I think we were relying far too much on supplied material from an industrial manufacturer, where traditionally they use a clay body that's fairly raw, and then uses rice husks as an agent in the clay to make it join easily and retain its form. So we'll definitely use a different type of clay body. Yeah, absolutely. One that's a lot easier to transport, and hopefully one that's a lot stronger in its firing.
And just finally, would you now do a puja, even if it wasn't a Tamil that you're working with? Will you carry over any of that, do you think?
I think I may do. And I have been making quite a bit of figurative sculpture since Kasarajan's visit as well, and doing some workshops with people, and just that idea of actually making manifest an object from some type of ritualistic viewpoint. I've always been quite keen on putting small kiln gods into my firing, but this has brought it into a far starker contrast, maybe. And I can see the reason and value in it.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Bernard. Now let's go to Varuni. And your work also involves a ritual, which is the translation of a form of decoration, a ritual decoration into ceramics. Can you just tell us a little about your process?
Yes. So the ritual that I'm exploring is the Coulomb. So the Coulomb is in some families, an everyday ritual. But in others, it could be practiced during auspicious occasions. But particularly, it is probably at its fullness during Pongo, which is the harvest festival. So it's a drawing, an ephemeral drawing, which is made at the threshold of homes. And it is made out of rice flour. And the traditional form is white. And of course, now it's much more vivid and colored, and many pigments make it quite striking. And they can be extremely elaborate to simple. And the notion of ephemeral came into my practice only fairly recently. And I also felt it captures that notion of transience, which I want to explore, and the transience being a way to also translate displacement, and not as loss per se, but just simply a transience. And it also has that symbolic notion of welcoming and entering. So and it's a women's ritual. So the woman of that household will do this ritual early hours of the morning in the front of the home. And as people walk in to the home, it will become part of the earth. But the notion that is also quite beautiful is that why it's made out of rice flour is the birds and the ants and the creatures of this world also eat that rice flour. So it dissipates as far, in terms of feeding. So there's something a generous spirit in that. So there's a generous spirit in welcoming the humans, but also a generous spirit in feeding the creatures of this world.
And can you say what your version of that is?
My version is, so I started with firing work, and then also a performative element. So I participate in the walking with fairly fragile pieces. So there are intact pieces, but also the fragile pieces. So where I incorporate designs, and often it's sari border prints in the ceramic. And then as you walk, you can see the mosaic simply fragmenting. But there's a beauty in that. And then I didn't want to look at it as though it is then dispensed with. So I started collecting it, and then as a memory formed another body of work with those fragments to remember the ritual that had been. And I have now done it in different places, in at residencies, one overseas and elsewhere. So I started then collecting these and having them as memories. And also a bit more recently, I started using the raw material, so just simply slip, and doing it publicly as well as a public art piece.
So it's a kind of a hybrid of the traditional ritual and studio ceramics in a sense.
Yes.
Interesting as a translation. So thank you. Let's go to Bemanda now, and your article, which was a very interesting one about the various Tamil processions. You're in an art school, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, which represents a particular model of art, but you're in a very rich culture which has also a folk or traditional element as well. So can you tell us the kind of story that you were telling through your article?
Well, like being a native Tamil myself, I've grown up in a conservative family, and I have witnessed like that transformation that happened in the way they decorate the cart for the pujas, the ceremonies. So I noticed like that, like during the past 10 years, there have been like a particular how do I say it? Like from the youngsters, like more involvement on their part to participate in the temple activities. And one of the reasons was that floral decoration. But at one point, like flowers in Mauritius was quite expensive. So they had to find alternative ways to decorate their carts. So from there, they started taking things like vegetables, palm leaves, fabric, to like alternatives to flowers. And this gave like quite amazing work. And it's also the dedication, because not much attention is given to these kind of craft. So I think they need that particular attention, especially like youngsters, because it gives them a sense of pride, a sense of belonging. And I think like promoting what they are doing is my way of contributing to help them like advance and like encourage them. So they were like really happy to read I sent them the link, and they were really happy to read the article. And I think it's important in the community. Like I said, it's like not only the decorative part, not only the craft, because each of them could like develop a particular signature, a particular style. And I couldn't cover all the groups in Mauritius, but there are quite a few. And I really appreciate the way they bond together, like across communities. Like we have different youngsters from different culture coming together to work over it. And very often it is done overnight, so they wouldn't sleep. And it's like a selfless practice. We are not even paid for that. And as I said before, it was my way, like, to pay like homage to them.
Right. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That you have an art form there that doesn't form any particular industry, as we would call it.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, it's one where there is innovation and development, and it seems important that you're able to reflect on it and to recognise that in some way as part of Mauritian culture, not just what might appear in the art gallery
Yeah.
at that time. Wondering now if we could open it up, and I thought it might be good to just go back to you, Glenn, and just to see if you've got any thoughts about what you've heard, and if you've got any questions you would like to ask, or other information you're interested to explore.
I think just listening to Vimanda as well, like the that commitment to young people was really quite central to the work I was doing in the water exhibition as well. You know, often, you know, in these spaces, young people kind of have a new desert identity, which I think has been overlooked for a long time. And instead of painting, they want to take photographs, and they want to make videos, and they want to create works which make sense to them. And so for me, I guess that's kind of out of this last few years working on that exhibition and spending so much time in that community, it almost helped formulate for me what my future looks like and what my role is in the sector after, you know, 10 years working in museums and galleries. And that's very much about cultivating those, you know, the capacity and abilities of young people working in remote spaces who don't have a lot of voice and who don't fall within the frame of contemporary art practice, because a lot of, you know, the work coming from those spaces that receives all of the focus is traditional painting. And so, yeah, I think that's just an interesting thing that, you know, particularly with, you know, Aboriginal Australian communities where there's a lot of kind of risk for young people, you know, cultivating an industry that supports their development and their interests is really important moving forward. Not everyone's a painter, and I think it's a really exciting time for us looking at, you know, photography, filmic, installation work, and try and get people to share their stories in ways that make sense to them rather than asking them to fill them up and the industry of Aboriginal art. So it's interesting listening to those synergies.
Right, and so not to be too anxious about what might be seen as a loss of particular traditions, but to see the kind of connections to place and so on emerging in other ways.
Yeah, and I mean, particularly with Nunadara people, you know, like young people getting around looking like they're on the streets of Brooklyn, you know, in their streetwear and their Nike kicks and what have you. But these people know how to hunt, they know how to find food and find water. And so what you read on the surface may look like a kind of cultural sort of a shift or change, but in this particular setting, it doesn't speak to loss. It just speaks to young people kind of finding their own way of exploring their self and expressing that to the world, which, you know, aligns to their idols and what have you. So I think that was one thing that we really wanted to push through the exhibition was Nunadara people, particularly young people, haven't lost as much as some other people in the country, and they may look like they're walking around Melbourne, but, you know, I've watched young girls jump out of a car, you know, after listening to hip hop in the car and dig for honey ants for 4 hours to find only a few honey ants. So, you know, it's just that kind of notion that we can't look at people and understand their capacity or their cultural knowledge and the depth and breadth of that knowledge.
Hmm. Would anyone else like to come in now, or have any other point they want to pick up?
Well, I think it's interesting, if I may just say something on that point. I think that's interesting, the idea of, Glenn, you were talking about making videos and photography and things like that. And I do think there are many people, young people, who are working with technology and doing amazing things. But I'm also finding, because I work with clay, there's a resurgence in interest in craft skills. And I think that there are many people that really like that tactility and that really connection with a material that is very basic and is ubiquitous. And so I'm finding increasingly in classes that I'm running that there are younger and younger people who are really keen and hungry to develop some facility with both hand and mind and actually make something tangible. And something I think that's real, not in that digital realm. So there's both of those things happening in conjunction, I think. And not everyone loves working on a computer. So both things seems to be, there's a bit of a synergy going on and a melting pot going on. But I found that really interesting about the reality of producing something that is permanent and tangible. And again, there's two sides to it. It's the actual making of the object seems to be of more importance perhaps than the finished piece in some cases. And in others, and that probably culturally determined, there's a great desire to own the object that they have made as if it's part of their personality that has become permanent and manifest. So a range of different strands kind of coalescing at the present, I think.
Thanks, Bernard. Baruni, we went to a Tamil concert on Saturday night and saw young people singing traditional songs, although some of the songs were actually Scottish and Irish ditties sung in Sanskrit, which was amazing. What was your impression of the young people who were performing then?
Well, what intrigued me was the fact that many of them would have been, so that was a junior school right the way through to high school students who were performing, and they would have been born in Australia, but it's the standard that really impressed me. And their also desire to, and it's quite a involved process to learn those ragams and traditional songs, and it was quite impressive to even for the 6, 7, 8-year-olds to actually sing together. To that capacity, they would have practiced many, many times. And they, what I would be interested to know is whether they speak Tamil at home and they even learned. So sometimes I'm intrigued by the first generation that moves to a country. They often want to move away from their traditional roots. And then the next generation, there's a desire by the parents for the children to go to schools and learn the language, even though they're not really speaking in Tamil or learning the dancing or song. So I was really impressed with that desire to want to adhere to those traditional, those traditions, Indian traditions in music, and dance is the same. Bharatanatyam is the same. Yeah.
So we're seeing different waves, both moving away and towards what might be seen as the traditional forms. Perhaps at the end, Vimanda, we might just hear from you about any other thoughts you might have about the way the kind of Tamil culture that exists in Mauritius is evolving, and do you see a similar kind of determination in younger generations to keep the language and the
definitely.
music and the dance and so on?
Yeah, what Varuni was telling about, like, I can draw a parallel to that with Mauritius, because nowadays nobody speaks Tamil in Mauritius. Like, the Tamil family is like very few of them who speak Tamil in their house, Like most of us, we speak Creole or French. However, there is this like the need to keep this tradition, like the way they'll go with the ritual and the way we dress up, the way we eat, the way we, the skills we learn, because our ancestors, they were craftsmen who came to Mauritius to work as craft workers. So I think deep inside, we do keep this, like, these skills that was we inherited, and even though we don't know the language, we don't speak the language, but the culture is like very present. Like even in my house, in the background, you can see the deity, and there is like, I'm happy also that the new generation, they are like striving to keep the tradition. I think it's important.
So thank you very much, Vimanda. And before we wrap up, does anyone have any last words or thoughts? I think we've opened up a very fruitful conversation across the Indian Ocean, and it's very exciting to think that there might be something like a triennial in development to keep these conversations going. So thank you so much, Glenn, for setting the scene with your beautiful and evocative essay on Ngura and homeland. Thanks, Bernard, for witnessing and understanding at a practical level the dramas of translating a village ceramic ritual to a city like Perth. Thanks, Varuni, for sharing your ceramic practice, which is translating an ephemeral ritual into something which can be part of the art scene. And thanks so much, Vimanda, for sharing with us this very important comparison between what's happening in Mauritius and what's happening in Australia, both settled countries where there are many migrants, each trying to negotiate between the culture of their home, where their people come from, and the mix of the country where they're living in. So thank you so much, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in other ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all.